Who are they? The lost boys? They're the children who fall out of the perambulators when the nurse is looking the other way. Oh, what fun it must be. Yes, but we are rather lonely. You see, we have no female companionship. Girls, you know, are much too clever to fall out of their prams.
Dating. Terrifying.
Everyone's favorite subject in 2020.
Or least favorite subject, depending on
especially if you live in the cities, apparently.
Especially if you're talking to women at 30. Single women at 30. Single heteronormative women at 30. Where do we begin? How do we date? How do millennials date? Why is it so fucked up? And
why don't we begin by saying why we think it's fucked up? Because not everyone who listens to us will be of an age where they've experienced this or seen it, or like that's one of the when we speak with older relatives, I don't think they can comprehend
how fucked up it is,
how different it is, how dramatically the expectations have shifted. And it's one of the reasons I actually we're relatively young, but I pity people younger than us. I think they even have it harder than we do and did.
I don't even know how they date. They don't even have phone calls anymore.
A lot of them don't date. Yeah. Well,
Well, aren't there studies showing that they're actually having less sex?
So there are people delaying losing their virginity, probably not deliberately delaying losing their virginity longer, a greater percentage. But they're also at the same time existing in this very hypersexualized environment. It's interesting. It's an interesting toxic little mix. But let's from what we've seen, what as a woman, what do you think is not functioning about modern dating?
Modern dating in general?
No, but
No, I know. Specifically, I'd like to think that the root of the dysfunction is actually in dating apps themselves. But I actually think it's much deeper than that. I think we've reached a point in our millennial societal interactions where we treat sex like a conversation, as casual as a conversation or a cup of coffee. And so it doesn't feel like there are any stakes. It doesn't feel like there's any effort to be made. It doesn't feel like there's any such thing as courtship anymore. And up until, a year and a half ago, I really was considering what my life might look like, in my early 30s, single, and what avenues I might take to have a kid on my own. Because I just sort of felt like the dating scene was so dire and that it would be impossible to meet a viable partner for myself. And a lot of my single friends right now are, reiterating the same concerns. It's really scary to, let's say, date 40 people in a year and have all of them go badly for one reason or another. And the number of times the phrase, "I'm not looking for anything serious," on behalf of a 35 to 40-year-old male is actually now frightening.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also from the female perspective, what's interesting is these kind of strange, I want to call them double standard expectations on men that women have of men. So if you're swiping on any given dating app, let's say Tinder, you meet for a drink and you end up going home with that guy and he doesn't call you back. I mean, the number of times my friends have expressed rage or labeled that person a fuckboy is... it's almost comedic at this point because on the one hand, I don't want to judge because, we're all in the same boat, really. But when you make sex, again, as casual as sharing a drink, if that's the end of the night, then conversations about relationships or building a deeper connection is kind of out the window at that point, I feel, from the guy's perspective. Why would you want to keep dating someone when you've already got the prize? It's the oldest cliche. It's what our grandmothers used to say about being conservative and dressing conservatively and not giving up the cookie. It's I don't know what young people call it these days. I don't even think they think of it like that.
So that's your female friend's perspective. I got lost in the train
I
of
mean,
thought.
not all of them. You have also here's the other thing too, which is the sex positive perspective, right? If I'm having casual sex, it's my right as a woman to do so. And I can have sex as aggressively or as casually as any man. And there are no consequences for that in my personal life if these are the things I say I want. And what's funny, I think, because you and I have talked about this a lot, but like, I don't believe you. Like, I do think that's true for some women. I do think women who choose not to have children they should absolutely not be shamed in any way, shape, or form. It is a choice. If you don't want to get married, that's also a choice. But I feel a lot of women are lying to themselves when they've had their upteenth casual hookup and they feel shitty about it after, and they chalk it up to, I'm just having fun.
I think it seems to get old at a certain point. It's fun and empowering when they're younger.
And in the moment.
And then life hits them around 30, give or take. And what seems to jar with their expectations is that up to then they've been able to more or less navigate men and dating, or they thought they were able to. And now they find they want something from men, namely commitment or emotional attachment. And now all of a sudden it's elusive. And I think that makes them, I've read so many articles, the phrase, where have all the good men gone?
But it's funny, just to tie that up too, like once the night is over and you've had sex with basically a total stranger, which was never a safe idea or necessarily a good idea anyway, which we can all say we've all done. And for those of us who, like, you know, if it doesn't feel good, if it feels kind of shitty, if we feel ashamed and we don't know what to do with those feelings of shame, or if there is an underlying expectation that we at least get a text back saying, you know, I had a nice night, I'd like to see you again. If that's the wish, it's like, it's such a cruel thing to keep doing to yourself. It's such a cruel wish for the impossible. And it posits men as the doers of all evil, like these fuckboys, when, I don't know, they're like, there are no rules anymore. There are no expectations that are okay to really have. If dating is a buffet now. And I think a lot of women still harbor that expectation that, you know, basic human decency will dictate that there will be a courtship of some kind that will ensue. And I don't think men are even thinking about that. I mean, I can't speak for men, but like, I don't think most dudes are even thinking that they're being shitty. I think some definitely are. And I think, you know, those are the men that are probably having the most sex among us. But for the most part, I don't think a dude actually thinks that a girl has those expectations when everything around the circumstances is that casual and is treated with more or less disregard. Right? We're talking about like the most intimate physical contact that you can have with a human being.
But we're ignoring the fact that there's this whole, you mentioned sex positivity. That's something of a mantra among women from our background, like educated, liberal city dwellers. So it's not even that the men aren't intuiting that the women want more than they're giving them. It's that the women are explicitly saying, not only verbally, but in their behavior, no, casual is okay. I can do casual. Like you just, I'm going to go back to what you said 5 minutes ago, but you mentioned something about, you know, casually dating 40 men in a year and having them all go sour. That's not men's experience. 40 dates in a year. Most men, not even close to that. And I think part of the reason that things have gone so casual for men and why courtship has been, I'm going to say, murdered, is that if a woman is on 40 dates in a year and the men have a sense that she's dating 40 different guys, they're not going to risk a lengthy courtship, emotional, financial investment in her. They're going to play it as casually as she does. And that's part of, I mean, you mentioned dating apps. They're fueling this in a big way because they are creating a kind of buffet mentality where you have every single person at your fingertips. But at the same time, you still only have your limited person, your limited amount of time and attention.
And it's not every single person, really, is it?
No, that's really worth noting too.
It's really not every person.
It gives you the illusion that you have all of the...
And it's actually the algorithm serves the best looking and most profitable seeming among men and women. But
okay, so we should mention...
Women are all going for the same guy. They just don't know they are.
So we should also mention there's a weird hierarchy at play here where a lot of people will say nothing of what we're speaking of will resonate with them because they'll say, I was able to do this, to do the casual and have fun. And then I was able to settle down when I wanted to. And that's true of men and women. I think that's there's like a hierarchy of good looking people, and the better looking you are, the more easily you can play this game. And the worse looking you are, the harder and harsher the game is. And I think that's true of both men and women to different degrees. And it might manifest differently for men and women, but it's worth noting that all of a sudden good looks have become a commodity to a degree that I don't think they ever were in a society where Christian values, let's say, dictated how people dated. It doesn't pay to be unattractive in this dating market. If you're a woman and you're unattractive, you're going to have a very hard time securing any kind of emotional or long-lasting romantic connection from men. But you might find that sexual connection isn't so difficult if you're willing to put out quickly, let's say. And then the unlovely men, I think, and that they're the kind of unspoken of demographic.
Or lost boys.
The lost, well, not, but it's not restricted to unattractive men. And a lot of these men aren't even attractive. They're unattractive. They're just not charismatic or not very extroverted, or they're not good at playing this game. But there's a large number of people like that too. Like I do think the modern dating economy doesn't serve a majority of men or women well. And you can kind of get a sense. I'm going to bring it back to Kristen Rupinian's story in the New Yorker, Cat Person, I think it was called.
Oh yeah,
and
that was 2 years ago.
It was 2 or 3 years ago, and she got a 7-figure book contract out of it. And it was that.
Did she really?
And she's already written, I think, at least one of those books.
Wow.
So for people who aren't familiar with this, it's a short story about a young woman having a short romantic sexual attachment with an older, kind of unsuccessful man, and she comes to regret that choice. But it resonated with a lot of people about how unfulfilling modern sex and dating is, to the point that a New Yorker story went viral in the 2010s, which is just unheard of. Any short story going viral is unheard of. And so this author got this massive book contract out of it. But I laughed reading it because it does capture what makes people, men and women, so unfulfilled about modern dating. There is a sense that you go in with a certain expectation and you come out emotionally damaged and unfulfilled and wondering what the hell just happened. It was kind of a Rorschach test, that short story, in that a lot of people saw what they wanted to see. And it was well written enough.
Yeah, that you could interpret it.
At least psychologically, that, it resonated with people. But the only point I wanted to make is that something that was so clearly awful for both people involved did resonate with so many people. That was a fair representation of modern dating. And that's kind of horrifying.
And yet, what have we learned? To pivot to another piece that went viral, regarding just the vagueness and sort of free-for-all territory of dating right now. It's the Aziz Ansari story too. That was around the same time, right? Babe.
Yeah, that was Me Too era, so sounds around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you explain what the article is?
Oh, this woman went on a date with Aziz Ansari and ended up giving him a blowjob at the end of the date, despite feeling really unsatisfied with how the date had progressed. And I remember one of her complaints was that I think he chose the wine for both of them, and that offended her. And I guess he didn't force her, but at the same time, he wasn't as polite or gallant as I guess she wanted him to be. And this was presented as a case of Me Too, and then that kind
written anonymously.
I don't remember.
We don't know who the person was, or we don't actually know the circumstances of it.
Right.
It was a lot of
but there was no even according to this quote unquote victim's account, it wasn't a forced sexual encounter. It was just an uncomfortable one, or one where she ended up feeling mistreated.
My long story short point was just that it's about expectations. She had an underlying expectation of a courtship of some kind of chivalry, of decency. Who knows what actually happened? Who knows what his real perspective on it was and how that night transpired? But really, regardless of who he is and his celebrity status, that date happens all the time.
Yeah, and what I'm struck by in that story, and then in listening to so many contemporary dating stories, is the expectations, the unspoken expectations women have. Like I said earlier, that we've murdered courtship, and yet there's still somehow an expectation that some courtship will go on. You've said to me that a majority of your friends expect the guy to pay for the first date, for example.
Or express disappointment when they don't.
Or express disappointment when they don't.
But haven't explicitly said that that's what they're expecting.
And I think I've sent you, we've got some pretty good data to suggest that I think it's still a majority of women expect that first date treatment. I'd be interested to speak to those women, to get them to be more explicit about what they want from the first date, and where they think the night is going, or the relationship is going based on that first date. All of this to me, and I'm kind of obsessive about this, but I think this is all a logical consequence of our treating men and women as if they are interchangeable, as if there's no inherent difference between them, and their expectations should align, and then being surprised and throwing up our hands in anger when they don't align. Because I don't think men have this, like, if men find out a woman is willing to sleep with him, they don't need dinner first. They don't need drinks. They can skip all of the preliminaries and go to the main event, and they're very happy to do that. And one of the better examples to make that point is looking at how gay men behave. Gay men have apps where you don't even have to speak to the person. You just kind of agree on a place and what you're going to do, and I don't even know if you shake hands. You just go do your business and leave. And it can be that concise, let's say. But women don't want those things. Heterosexual women want something more from heterosexual men, and we're not allowed to say that anymore. And women aren't allowed to say that, or even, I think that's part of what's at play here, is that they feel guilty for wanting more than they're told they should want, which is really fascinating.
No, but I mean, maybe that is part of it, but I also think a huge part of it is a double message about how you should behave as a feminist, progressive, liberal-minded woman. And that line of thinking, oh, this is dangerous to say, is directly at odds with perhaps your deeper underlying biological needs and desires, specifically around dating and marriage and having children.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get to the top of a law firm without sacrificing most of your mid-20s to mid-30s, let's say. We touched on this last episode, but if you start trying to have children maybe in your late 30s, you might discover some fertility issues you weren't even aware existed. And because you weren't really thinking about it, you didn't think this would be a biological or physiological obstacle. We understand that there's a finite time on fertility, but I don't think we actually understand how that plays out in real time and lived experience. I don't think most people are planning for a family anymore. And one of the lines that really hit me when you and I were talking about doing this series together and having these conversations that are scary to have a little bit because of how people might perceive them, but you can't. I mean, you said to me, very clearly, you stated, you can't alter women's role without altering men's. They're tethered. So if the message men are receiving is that I am a strong, independent, autonomous woman that doesn't need your income, and I don't even need your partnership to feel fulfilled, or to have children for that matter, because that's another message that is being disseminated in the feminist ether a lot, which is that single moms are fine and that it's perfectly all right, and even maybe better to be a single female parent raising a child than having a man around who might buck it up for you. But if that is the message, and if men are what they are with their raging testosterone and their hormones and their biological makeup, and they are, we know, research has proven, able to have sex differently without emotional attachment, it's ironic to me that we still haven't seen, we keep wanting to swallow this awful red pill every time we go out on a date and think that the person's going to call us back after we've had casual sex with them and not stated it in any way, shape, or form what it is we might be looking for. So yeah, we're terrified to have the conversation, but we also are trying to convince ourselves that conversation doesn't really need to be had. Because we're really slowly, what we're doing is erasing the role of men, not only in courtship, but long term. And yet that is directly at odds with, I think, what a lot of women really, really want.
Heavy stuff.
Painful.
Mm-hmm. There's so many men who are they approach every beautiful woman they see. And women are so inundated with attention from so many men like this on an almost daily basis, some women, that it's hard to stand out as being sincere in your interests if you do that. If you're the guy who does it once in 6 months, you're still going to be suspected of being the guy who does it every day to every beautiful woman he sees.
And you're shot down regardless.
or it's just you're fighting an uphill battle almost. And then something I find really amusing is there's an entire kind of cottage industry of articles saying dating apps are the most appropriate place for men, and men should never approach women, even in bars, but especially not when they're out in public, not at the gym, not at the office. There's all kinds of kind of bureaucracy around where men can make their approach, and most of it is negative. It's inappropriate to do it at the gym. It's inappropriate to do it at the office. Definitely don't do it to a stranger on the street. It's like, okay, so the dating apps, if she's on the app, she's looking to date, right? So that's the socially sanctioned place to do it. And you're not inherently being, I don't know, disrespectful of her time if you do it on a dating app versus if you approach a stranger in real life. So apps, it's like it's comfortable now. It's a little bit easier for the man too, because rejection's less painful. If it's, she never swiped on you, you don't even know she rejected you. And if she rejects you over an app, you never met her. And the feeling is less painful because it's not in person. So everything migrates to these apps. But the apps have their own economy too. There's an underlying algorithm that shows who you match with and who you don't match with. And so all of a sudden, kind of things become more superficial too. If you're a charming guy who isn't the best looking, it's hard to get your charm across on a dating app. You might not even get swiped on to begin with, so no one will know you're charming. No one will know you're funny.
And you're saying that builds resentment.
I'm sure for a lot of men there's resentment. I think a lot of them are just kind of fed up with it and lonely and dissatisfied. That's one, like I have male friends, more acquaintances than friends, who every time they match with a girl on Tinder, they put her first name, because they know her first name from Tinder, into their contact list, and then they use last name Tinder. So it's like Anne Tinder, Caitlin Tinder, Sarah Tinder. And I've seen their contact lists where the T section is like 10 times as long as any. They've met that many women on Tinder, and it's great for them. Like, they're having fun, but that's not the common male experience on Tinder. And what's so amusing to me is that, and I've done this with female friends, I've said, take 2 or 3 of your friends aside who are all using Tinder at the same time and compare your matches. And I bet there's a lot of overlap. So a minority of men have a kind of buffet of choice. And that's not a great way to get men to behave gallantly among women if they have that buffet of choice. They're like, look at how powerful men in the media, like celebrities or actors and athletes behave when they basically have their choice of women. That's kind of what happens on a smaller scale to men who do really well on Tinder. But that's still only a minority of men. Most men are kind of, I have male friends who, like, the only matches they get are bots. And it's like, imagine going a couple of weeks where the only time, you have a match, you get a notification, you have a match, and you get excited and you open your phone, you open Tinder, and it's, hey, sign up for this dating site. That's
depressing.
That's really depressing.
And it
really demoralizing.
Yeah, and complete blow to your self-esteem.
Yeah, and Tinder, by the way, and it's the biggest one, but it's not the only one, not the only dating app, but they're very guarded about data. They don't want people knowing. There have been independent kind of studies trying to figure out like what the rate of swiping is for men versus women. And I've seen like between 6 and 10% for men, for women swiping right on men, and between 30 and 50% for men swiping right on women. So there's just this massive, massive disparity in who's getting romantic attention. And we're so far from being able to be honest about this. But the underlying message so many men get is like, you're not worthy. No love for you, no attention for you. Whereas Tinder's not for you.
Do you think, arguably the same is true for unattractive women?
No, I don't.
But that's what I'm asking. Do you think that that's...
I think I would say I know actually that they still get matches. I think they have a harder time. They get sexual interest from men much more easily than they get romantic interest from men, which is its own little psychodrama for them.
Right, and the swiping data would reveal also that women tend to elevate their standards and men lower their standards on dating apps.
Well, from what I've understood from dating studies is that if it's for casual sex, men lower their standards dramatically.
Right.
And
so
if it's
a match
for casual sex, women increase their standards. So it would depend on why they're using Tinder. Tinder was initially supposed to be just a hookup app, but now it's amusing to me. I've used it rarely, but I have friends who use it. And if you go through female profiles, the most common phrase you'll see is no one night stands, no hookups, looking for, like, you do not see that on male profiles, but it's on so many women's profiles.
I was going to say, all I saw when I was on dating apps was nothing serious. Yeah. Nothing serious.
That's great.
Or also no tall girls.
That's hilarious.
Which ruled me out.
That's really funny. But that's something that just blows people's minds. That's the kind of Kafkaesque world we're in right now, where the male's profiles say nothing serious and the women's profiles say nothing short term.
And everyone's lonely.
And everyone's self-esteem takes a major hit. It's astonishing.
And I guess, I mean, from apps to also internet culture, right? Like, I think, the nightmare versions of your worst dating experience with the guy, the loneliest, most resentful men who have given up on dating entirely, we call them incels, right? Like, that's the...
Oh, that term is... technically it's an internet subculture.
Like 4chan is filled with incels, according to...
Yeah, but so it's become a kind of all-purpose insult for men. There are people who self-identify as incels, and those are, strictly speaking, men who want to have sex but can't, so they're involuntarily celibate. And then there's kind of the places where incels hang out on the internet, the forums. There's like a kind of underlying ideology there where there's a lot of anger at women. They think loneliness is exclusively a male experience, and women are not genuinely lonely. Which
is distorted, but not maybe distorted because obviously everyone experiences loneliness, but also maybe based on what dating apps would show us if we had access to all the research and data, is that maybe they are experiencing higher degrees of loneliness.
One of the more mind-blowing studies I saw recently, it was a 10-year difference in who'd had sex in the last year and who hadn't had sex in the last year. And from, I think it was 2008 to 2018 was the range of the study. And in 2008, it was 18% of men reported not having had sex in the last year. And it was 13 or 14% of women. And by 2018, it had more than doubled. I think it was 33 or 34% of men had not had sex in a year. And that's more or less coinciding with the rise of those dating apps and with the shifting of dating to this medium. And so, I mean, assuming those men wanted to have sex in a year and didn't, that's a lot of quote unquote involuntarily celibate men. And obviously not all of them are most of them are not on message boards. Most of them have no idea what that term means. But that's a lot of lonely men. That's a lot of lonely men.
Also, the kind of sex that we want to be having versus the kind of sex that we are having. The slow death of intimacy, real intimacy.
But that's something.
The eroding of intimacy and connection.
Mm-hmm. I've spoken to you about this privately, but it blows my... I know women who are as sexually experienced as porn stars, in terms of the number of partners they've had and the sex acts they've performed, but they've never done something as innocent as walk down the street hand in hand with someone or introduced a boyfriend to their parents.
Yeah, I know.
They don't have that experience. So they have all the sexual intimacy in the world and then none of the emotional intimacy. And that's also very scarring.
I don't even know if, the word intimacy, and it's hard to assess.
Well, I mean, sex is an inherently intimate act.
It is the most intimate act.
Well, but the funny thing is it really isn't, though.
Between two people.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be. Theoretically,
emotionally.
No, I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I'm just saying it turns out that walking down the street hand in hand with someone, that's something. I went to a boarding school, and that was no PDA it was kind of taken as a given that people would hook up, and they had all this. They had a kind of culture, its own language around what hooking up meant, but you didn't walk, across the campus hand in hand with a girl. You didn't do that. Intimate. Yeah, but you're signaling something. No, you don't do that. And that was I remember finding that off-putting and juvenile when I was 17. But now that's the
norm.
It's becoming more normalized. And obviously there are still people dating, and you can still find people going on dates and walking hand in hand, but a whole lot of people haven't had that. And that's something to the older generations, quote unquote, even our parents and our older aunts and uncles, it would just blow their mind, I think, to think that's become a rare commodity, that kind of emotional intimacy. And we disguise that loneliness, by the way. That's another thing, that the lonely people are supposed to be kept out of sight. We have all kinds of hobbies, and
it's uncomfortable to look at them.
And it's uncomfortable for us to acknowledge this exists.
But what's also kind of scary in terms of how even the language around sex and intimacy and I guess behaviors and gestures. But I've also had girlfriends tell me experience, like, I mean, and countless rom-coms have also touched on this too, from like the female experience of dating a guy who is seemingly so into you, so intimate with you, so playful, has all of the postures of a boyfriend, or someone who at least genuinely cares about you. But when the real conversation hits of, what are we, which is like a meme.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, I think the latest meme right now is a guy in the front seat of a car and he just like opens a door and like drops out of the car as the car's driving. It's like her, what are we, him, and he just like falls out of his own car.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, like what's ironic to me is most of my friends, and I myself too have dated guys like this, and I was angry at them thinking that they were either lying or pretending or duping me. But I actually, when I think about it a little bit more from the perspective of where we're at right now in our culture with dating, I'm sure all of those acts of intimacy and sort of boyfriend or partner-like behavior are genuine. It's just there is no, because the playing field is as large and vast as it is, because the choice is endless, because of the buffet mentality, because there's no real need to commit if you're a dude, because there's no role for you to play. There's no expressed need for you to show up financially or in partnership or in parenting. Then, all of those things become kind of like, well, why would I take it to the next step? We have this great thing going here. We're having sex. We're seeing each other regularly. We're intimate with each other. We go to the movies. We hold hands. That whole line, like, why do we need to label it? Right? That to me is such a powerful indicator of how dysfunctional we really have become. We've changed. We're not even having the next step conversations. We don't want to get to that next step. And the irony is, like, we call these guys the Peter Pans, right? They never want to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
We've all dated a Peter Pan as a running joke. Like he's either like in like a rock star or
You said to me once the people with multiple job descriptions, like, what do you do?
A slashy is what we used to call them. I don't know what we call them now.
That's great. Yeah.
Like a DJ / artist / like financier.
What do you do for money? Copyright.
But I'm good looking enough to get a lot of women, and I will make you feel good about yourself very briefly. We've all dated those guys, but I do think it's interesting that like the desire for intimacy is there. And yet when it actually comes time to sort of, I guess, morphing that into something tangible, real and concrete and lasting, we're all in a sinking ship. No one is propelling that conversation forward. No one wants to propel that conversation forward. Women don't want to admit that that's what they want, and for a myriad of personal reasons. Or we're trying to convince ourselves that that's not what we really want because individual liberty is way more important than family planning and community building. I say that sarcastically, but I also realize that like there's a certain amount of navel gazing around our own sense of how we define ourselves. So we're going to put off as long as possible defining family. And then that message that a lot of dudes are getting is that they're kind of useless, right? Like, we don't need you to be our partner. We don't need you to be our husbands. I don't want a husband. I want to have fun too. I want a good looking guy. And then I also want all the intimacy that comes with it. You cannot have all that without getting vastly disappointed, without lying to yourself, or without ultimately feeling like shit. I think.
Before we started recording, we debated whether or not we were going to mention marriage statistics. And this is why I think you have to mention marriage, because you can't say that what we currently have is dysfunctional unless you posit that an alternative functional dating world has some goal to it. And that's what I find the source of confusion for women is that they act in their 20s as if there is no goal. They literally put off even thinking about marriage and children. And then give or take around the age of 30, all of a sudden it gets real for them. All of a sudden they're reminded that there's, ideally they should have their lives in order at a certain, they should have a romantic partner and they should be on their way to marriage and on their way to children. And a lot of them don't. And that's all of a sudden where the kind of crisis comes. What's the name of Hermione Granger? Emma Watson was interviewed recently. I think she just turned 30. And she said, like when I was 22, I just didn't understand the big deal about 30, and I thought people were making, now I'm 30 and yeah, I get why everyone freaks out about it. because I don't have things in order. But she used the term, I'm trying to think of myself as self-partnered, from now on. I want to destigmatize being signal, so I'm self-partnered. A lot of there's just a lot of bluster, a lot of,
like, what does that even mean, to self-partner?
But like a lot of what you've said about how women are thinking, like the line I keep coming to in my head is, the lady doth protest too much in Hamlet. I don't believe you. And I like what you're saying is you don't like, no, it's just casual. No, I'm all about sex positivity. I have a friend who was given, he had sex with a girl. And then after that, she presented him with a literal contract about how she explained to him in the text message with this contract attached that she practices ethical non-monogamy. And if they're going to continue seeing each other, like she wants him to kind of read through this contract and agree to like its terms. And he did not want to see her again. And he didn't reply to this text message.
What is ethical non-monogamy? Well, how did she define ethical non-monogamy? Like, what were those stipulations?
Oh, she has a romantic partner that she considers her boyfriend, but there's an understanding that they're both going to sleep around. Although apparently he doesn't sleep around, and she wanted my friend to know this because it would make him safer from an STD perspective. But part of the ethical non-monogamy is, if you sleep around, you need to let me know that you've slept with someone else, just, for my own sexual security. And you always have to use condoms, both with me and with other partners. And it's amazing. It's completely contractual. It's the language of the law brought into romance. And
well, it's not romance. I don't know what
well,
that
it kills
is,
romance immediately.
Yeah.
But what...
It's also very, very, very sad.
It's extremely sad. And this person, like, knowing
also
more about her, you start to understand, oh, like, you're a bit damaged.
Yeah,
like,
there's also a high degree of self-delusion in that. I don't know.
But that's what I see everywhere. I see self-delusion everywhere among so many people, men and women. I have male friends who are resentful that women don't want to date them, but whose personal lives are not at all in order. Like, they don't have a job, or they don't have the job they should have at their age. They don't live on their own. And they're surprised that, like, their inherent self-worth isn't enough to get them someone who loves them. It's like, well, but women are going to be at least a little practical. Like, they're going to have some expectations of you. If you're going to be, you're going to have things a little bit more, but they don't want to acknowledge that. But there's a similar angle with women. And I think that
this is a tricky conversation too, in and of itself, right? Like,
every conversation we have on any of these subjects is an absolute minefield.
It is a minefield. But the slippery slope is also, and this is interesting too, because it harkens back to convention, a C word we all hate, conservatism as well. But the expectation that the person that you date has a job and earns a living, women do absolutely. I mean, I can poll all my friends. That is an expectation. If I'm going to be dating you in any serious manner, you have a job, and chances are you earn more money than me.
Well, we have data on dating apps and sites where one of the variables that dramatically increases men's success with women is what they list their job occupation as. If they say lawyer or doctor, all of a sudden there's more. And it's the same. They've done this. They've had the exact same profile, the same kind of pictures, the same information about hobbies and interests, and they just tweak the variable of career. And that is enough to increase matches from women, which is perfectly understandable to me. If you posit that the women want some kind of long-term thing and that the high-earning man represents security. But what I find infuriating, and what a lot of men find infuriating, is there's a dishonesty around this. They don't acknowledge that they have this preference.
No, I was just going to say, you're getting at the point I was going to make, which was the hypocrisy of not actually owning that expectation that you have of whoever it is you date. And then also, and this is another minefield, but most of my friends who have married and who have kids would love to work less hours. Some not at all. Mm-hmm. Because having two kids, young kids, and being able to take care of them and manage them and being available to them, but also, sleeping and
not going insane with obligations. Because a family is its own massive obligation.
And it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
They would like to work less. And to say that out loud, they almost feel ashamed in doing that because, they want to have a career also, but most of my friends do not want to have their career more than they want to be available to their kids. Mm-hmm. And that's a minefield to say out loud because I mean, I could hear it now. I can hear like the screams from like the internet right now being
But
like, well, we should be monetizing. We should be paying women for being mothers. But
they're emotional labor.
But we were in a way paying women to be mothers for the last 50 years in the sense that there was a male provider who was present and providing for your lifestyle. That was the quid pro quo, and it was very, very clear. It wasn't always perfect, but it was a very clear understanding that I am breadwinner, so you can raise family. And these are two, like, we make it sound like women were forced into these roles, these domestic roles, and caged there. But our current modern landscape and our current economy doesn't actually help women at all to be able to realize both, let alone one.
Well, something else that's changed dramatically in that regard. People used to couple long-term much earlier. So people with the men, like women, I think the rate of first marriage even 30 years ago, the average age of first marriage 30 years ago was something like 21 or 22. And now it's, especially for educated women, it's creeping closer to 30. And it's higher than that for men. So what's happening is, in the past, you used to kind of build a life together, and you would invest yourself in a man who he wasn't successful yet, but you saw potential in him. And you were able, from a very young age, when you're both very young, to kind of mold each other to each other's expectations. Whereas now what's happening is women are looking around for men in their 30s who meet those expectations. And a lot of those men who haven't had that long-term relationship have decided, part-time work's fine for me, or my current income level, even though it's not a lot of money, I can get by on that. That's all my expenses met. Why do I need to make more money? And so there's this dearth of high-earning men at exactly the point where women start to say, I want a family and I want someone who can provide, and I have these expectations for my life. And that's a double bind for those women. Men don't, in the absence of women's coaxing, let's say, or women's influence, they don't all become breadwinners. They don't all put themselves in positions to take on 30-year mortgages. There's something actually very heroic. We demean that for a very long time post 1960. There's something really heroic about taking on a 30-year mortgage and saying, it sucks, but I'll work my 50 hours a week and I'll pay down that home and I'll have put a roof over my wife and family's heads. That's heroic. A lot of men don't want to do that anymore and won't do that anymore, and don't see why they should do that. And yet when women hit a certain age and start to wake up to the fact that they actually do want a family, they look for those men. And there just aren't as many of those men around. It's almost like I think most men don't experience this positively. Margaret Wente, who's a columnist, I think, for the Globe and Mail, wrote an article maybe 10 years ago where she said, what we thought was liberation for women has really been liberation for men. And this is men are living in a sexual utopia.
Right. Which is
true for some, there's certainly men who.
It's true for the men who are getting all the dates on Tinder.
Yeah. But the majority of men who aren't getting those dates don't just feel like they've been let off the hook. They feel like there's no source of meaning or respect out of dating. Dating is demeaning to them. It's this horrible experience. Like one of the memes on the internet is that dating for women is like shopping. You kind of go through your app and I like this man. He's got these interests, or he's got this career, or he looks like this. But for men, it's like a job interview, and it's like a perpetual job interview. And a lot of men just kind of like, if there's no meaning in it, if it isn't fun because you don't get the same matches as your better looking friends or your more charismatic friends, they're gonna kind of back away from that, and they have backed away from that in a big way, and they've backed away from marriage in a big way, and child rearing in a big way, and they're certainly not going to adopt all of the responsibilities of a 1950s, 1960s father taking on that mortgage if that has been the preamble to marriage. If it's like, oh, I'm 30 now and I want a kid. Where are you? Well, where were you when I was 20? That's often the response. So there's that to say.
Right. And ultimately it culminates in this very real mutual distrust between the sexes, between men and women. We don't trust each other.
But that's something that I think when we say that modern dating is dysfunctional, one of the big causes of that is there's this massive amount of distrust between men and women.
And rightly so.
But that's what I find. We had a structure, and it was an imperfect structure for many reasons. It was given to us by our culture, and particularly by religion, and it dictated how people behaved and how they couldn't behave. And the theory of the 1960s was that was only an imposition on us. That was only restrictive. It was only limiting. And if we remove that, we'll be happier. We'll have more freedom. And we do have more freedom now. But freedom to do what? That freedom looks a lot like anarchy to a lot of people. They even if they know what they want, and they don't often know what they want, but even if they do know what they want, they go into the dating market and they have a very hard time finding anyone who matches their needs and wants. And that's true of men and women to greater or lesser degrees at different points in their lives. But that's anarchy. That's not the kind of happy freedom promise of the 1960s. That's loneliness and sadness and anger, mutual anger between the sexes, enmity.
Yeah, and of course it does. I mean, especially with social media and the internet being what they are now, and various corners of the internet where you can find a myriad of ways in which women are attractive, cute, good-looking women, younger women are monetizing male loneliness in different ways. From like, what was that? What did they call it last week that you sent me, and it blew my mind because I'd never heard of it before. Because apparently I'm a Luddite.
The Twitch streams.
The Twitch streams. Like it blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I lost sleep over it. It's so ironic to me that in an era where supposedly we're our most progressive about how we should be thinking about and talking about and treating women, and also how women should be presenting themselves in the media, online, whatever, here you have the most basic example of leveraging youth and beauty.
Wait, let's be more specific about what we're talking about. You're talking about girls who use Twitch, which is a video gaming entertainment streaming site, and they're not really all about the entertainment aspect, the video game aspect. They're more about kind of appealing to lonely men, and they dress a certain way and they speak a certain way.
In a high-pitched voice. They dress like little girls or girly, very, very girly.
Like almost a fantasy version of what the men are
almost
looking for.
Almost an anime version.
Yeah,
of
an unreal. Yes.
Unobtainable,
non-existent.
And this one, I mean, we'll link it.
But hold on. Before you even get into a specific case, that's one level of this. And then there's more explicit levels where Twitch is theoretically, you're not allowed to, there's no nudity on Twitch. But there are sites with the exact same kind of infrastructure where it's nudity.
There's cleavage.
There's a lot of cleavage, and sure. But then there are also cam sites, which have become massively popular in the last 10 years, which are the same infrastructure as Twitch, which is you have a chat room and it's like you can see the girl, but the girl can't. It's almost all there are men on it, but the men are appealing to gay men. So it's not like these are not places where heterosexual women go. It's either gay women or gay men or heterosexual men go to watch performers. And an aspect of that is sexual, but a huge aspect of it also is interactive. It's not just a video that you're watching that anyone could watch. It's a real live human being, almost always very young, interacting with people in the chat room. And there's something, there's a sexual aspect, of course, and that's why it's so lucrative. But there's also, someone's talking to me and I'm talking to someone. And it's a simulacra of face-to-face conversation. It's a moment of real life intimacy. I'm going to give you even another layer deeper, which I don't know how long this site has existed. It's called OnlyFans. There's comparable ones, I believe. But OnlyFans apparently blew up, especially during this pandemic, because everyone's locked inside. And OnlyFans works like Facebook, where you have a profile. It's an X-rated profile, and people can pay you. I think they either pay for photos you put out or videos you put out. They'll pay a one-off fee, or they can subscribe like Patreon. It's a subscription model where they pay a certain amount a month and they get access to not only your private photos, but maybe your Snapchat. So like, hey, this is me. This is what I'm doing today. I'm going bowling. That's a thing now too. And that's the commodification of female sexuality. They call it sex work. That's the sort of positive, the sex positive term for it. This is sex work. We used to call it prostitution. But that's what's going on, and it's been normalized to an incredible degree.
To a frightening degree.
And I want to point out like an interesting because so much of this is the influence of post-1960s thought, which is to say feminism. There was a schism in feminism, an early schism between what became the sex positive wing and then the sex negative wing. And the schism was over pornography and prostitution. And it was the Andrea Dworkin crowd who ended up losing the battle in feminism. They allied themselves with the Christian right, and their stance was all prostitution, all pornography is inherently exploitative of women. They lost out, and the sex positive crowd said, well, we're owning our sexuality. In fact, there's something empowering about this because men are paying us for this. And this is, there's that strain of thought is you don't have to scratch very hard. You don't have to spend much time on sites like Jezebel or Salon or the Huffington Post to find that argument made in various ways. This is empowering. This is sex positive. Why shouldn't we monetize our sexuality? And it's hard in a kind of contractual vision of liberalism to say why you shouldn't do that. But I would bet from a life outcome perspective, a lot of those girls who do this kind of work end up very jaded and cynical and lonely and dissatisfied, not only with themselves, but with the work they're doing. But we're not supposed to say that. And then, of course, there's something very exploitative.
We're definitely not supposed to say that.
And then there's something exploitative about taking lonely men and kind of getting them to open their wallets for that brief little bit of sexual or romantic interaction that they're paying for. And that's a thing right now. That's a thing. That's part of the landscape of modern dating.
But it's also, I mean, it's not even a part of dating, right? You don't have to date to engage in that kind of online relationship where nothing actually comes into fruition in a tangible way for you. There's no, I mean, the female makes a profit, and at the end of the day, you still sleep alone if you're a dude.
Sure, but I'm making an even broader point, which is that you don't have to be a woman who does this to be affected by this in some way, because your dating prospects are in some sense limited to whatever the men are who are available to you in your area. And if even a non-trivial number, a minority, but a kind of substantial minority are doing this, they're not dating. And by the same token, if a minority, and to be clear, we're not talking about a majority of men or women who watch this or who engage in this, but even the minority who do, that has a ripple effect on the larger majority. They're like the consequences kind of come down the road.
It is back to that idea that these young girls are leveraging the very things that arguably feminism has been fighting against for the last 50, 60 years. Their youth and their beauty to get male attention. And they're not using any special skills. They're not using their education. Some of them don't even need fucking education for how much money they're making. And
the ones who make money make a lot.
They make a fuck ton of money, but it's also like, this is another minefield, but that somehow has become progressive.
Yes, sex positive. You're sticking it to the patriarchy.
In the most, subservient. Anyway,
But I should say, because one criticism of what I've just said is that this is still a fringe thing, which is true, it is. But the same logic that's at play on OnlyFans is at play on Instagram, and Instagram's not a fringe thing. I'm blown away by how many people have Instagram. I don't have Instagram, but apparently everyone has Instagram, like everyone had Facebook. And the same kind of, if you're a teenage girl, dating life has gone on Instagram. That's like where people go to check you out, and where a lot of flirting happens.
It's literally where you curate your selfies into a gallery of
and
here's what I
worse
look like
than
every
that,
single day.
Worse than that, you can quantify your popularity by how many hearts, how many likes you get, how many followers you have.
And I wonder how you go about getting likes.
There you go. There's a logic at play there too, which is, I don't necessarily want to share bikini photos of myself at 16 or 17, but my more popular classmates are doing that. Like, there's this pressure. Or I don't want to use Photoshop to touch up my photos, but I had a zit that day. Like, South Park's done an entire episode on how perverted this is. That this is happening. It's not just happening to teenagers. It's happening to just going through puberty. It's terrible, terrible pressure. It's distorting of your personhood in a major way to have to be kind of on display like that. And we've normalized that too.
And we've called it progressive. And also the hypersexualization of young girls now, thanks to living in.
But it's also worth saying,
the
like,
Kardashian area in which we live in, like, augmented young girls.
Yeah.
Girls actually pursuing surgery for the sake of looking better on Instagram.
But here's something. In the same way that Twitch, which began as a video game streaming platform, it was like, that was the initial appeal. It still is. I think the majority of people still do that. But it's turned a blind eye to that kind of more lurid aspect of it, where it's women in push-up bras and low-cut tops interacting with really lonely men, because they make money off this. Like, Twitch gets a percentage of donations or subscriptions at least. So they turn a blind eye to that. Instagram's turned a blind eye to the fact that a huge chunk of their market value comes from the fact that it's like a meat market. It's like this is young, beautiful people on display.
But it's also it's not just a meat market in the sense that it's not just beautiful people in general. It is an augmented reality version of people literally who are sculpting their bodies to be hypersexual.
But it's the same logic in competitive sports where like one person takes steroids, so now everyone has to take steroids because if you're not taking steroids, you can't compete. But if you're not photoshopping your photos and they're photoshopping your, how are you going to compete?
But what's ironic, but here's the thing: this is going on right in front of our eyes, and there are millions of profiles like that, at least for women. It's kind of fascinating and really ultimately confusing that this is all going on, like these hypersexualized, augmented women who are blowing out their hips and their tits and their lips into this kind of like, they all look like an army of really, really sexual women in the same era of #MeToo and progressive feminism. That's basically saying that women are not to be viewed as sexual objects. That's saying that women are never, ever to be looked at by a man in any kind of way that's degrading. And yet here are these young women under 20 who are saying, come and fucking look at me, ogle me, like me, follow me. Like, and not just like 15-year-olds. And you see every inch of their ass in a photo. The irony too is it's all coinciding with the moment in our culture where we're also denying that gender even exists, that there are such things as biological differences between men and women. We're saying, well, no, that's not a real thing. Gender is a construct. If it's such a construct, then why do you have this army of women becoming hyper feminine and hypersexual? To what end? For men, on behalf of men. It is not to self-empower. I don't believe that. I understand how sexuality works from a female perspective, and they are not doing that because they don't want to be looked at. And you can't say that out loud, and you get slandered for it, but like that's the truth. It must be so confusing as a young woman to have both those messages shoved down your throat as though they're one and the same, as though they're not completely contradictory and conflicting ideologies.
I just had this is my second Dave Chappelle flashback in this entire conversation. The first one, we were talking about how dysfunctional modern dating is. There was a Chappelle Show skit, this must have been like early 2000s, where he literally has a girl sign, he's about to have sex with a girl, and he has her sign a contract for consent. And not only does she have to consent to having sex with him, but there are option boxes for every little sexual act they're going to perform. And in the early 2000s, that was a joke. That was inconceivable. And now it's like that's like on college campuses. This is like how the bureaucracy works. Like you might have consented to the kissing, but did you consent to the hand stuff? And if you didn't, like that's rape. Like that's where we're going. So Chappelle there, he anticipates this. And then he has a great skit, which is a terribly politically incorrect skit, where he describes a girl walking down the street in like almost nothing. And he approaches her as if she's a prostitute. And the punchline of the skit, after she gets offended that she's not a prostitute, he says, well, you may not be a whore, but you're wearing a whore's uniform. And that was funny back then. And it didn't get him canceled. It would probably get him canceled now. But that's the mix.
Dave Chappelle can't be canceled.
You'd hope not. People have tried. But that's the mixed messaging from the man's perspective. It's like, okay, like you actually do want like romance because everything up until now in your behavior doesn't signal that to me. And it seems like you haven't even worked out for yourself what you want. And then you get mad at me when I don't meet those expectations. I'm amused. Like if we had a listener in their 20s, I think they're all going to like what we're saying will resonate with them. And then anyone in their maybe mid 40s to like certainly 50s and 60s, this would just be inconceivable to them. They just wouldn't comprehend that it's come to this. There's a great article in The Atlantic, like more than 10 years ago now, something called the secret Cold War between American women. And it referenced a study, an ingeniously designed study that had women in a room. And they said they knew they were going to be part of a study. They didn't know that the study had already begun. And they had a woman walk into the room inappropriately dressed for the environment. So this was theoretically going to be, I think, a medical study, and it was a professional setting. And so most of the women there dressed as if they were going to work. And then one girl walks in and she's, short skirt, push-up bra, low cut top, I think too much makeup on. She sits down, she interacts with them, she leaves, and then they record them secretly what they say about this girl. And then they do it. The other variable is they do the same group, different girl, more appropriately dressed. And the girl who's inappropriately dressed gets spoken of in negative terms or mentioned at all. and the girl who's appropriately dressed, the feelings are warmer and more friendly. I think they even had them hooked up to heart rate monitors, and the girl who's appropriately dressed, when she walks in, the heart rates of the women who are already in the room don't change. When the inappropriately girl walks in, all of a sudden heart rates kind of shoot up a little bit.
Rage,
this is
threat.
We're just sexual competition. Like, this person's signaling something that I'm not signaling.
Primitive again.
And I remember when that came out, I was still on Facebook, and I had all of my friends were, liberal arts grads or students. And the reaction was, well, this doesn't take into account patriarchy. We have been conditioned to be this way. This is social they didn't actually use the phrase socially constructed, but what they're postulating is that there is no innate interest women have that would drive them to be in competition with one another, which is nonsense. You do have an innate interest. You are in competition with each other. And your behavior shows that over and over and over again. It's why I can say that there's this kind of arms race logic on Instagram where so-and-so posted this selfie and I have to, match or exceed how beautiful or sexual they were in that instance. Every conversation we have pivots around the people that we find to be contradicting themselves in their attitudes. They say one thing
at every turn.
Right. But it's the underlying hypothesis they're working on, and that doesn't seem to serve them well, is that there isn't an innate difference between men and women. We have 20-year-old girls on Instagram or on OnlyFans who can make $100,000 and upwards a year. This is like the salary of a professional well established in their career, but they're on Instagram or they're on OnlyFans showing skin, and they're making six figures in their early 20s. But it's all socially constructed. It's nothing. It's just an incredible denial. And we market like in the same way that Wesley Yang and we've spoken about commodifying male loneliness. We're commodifying female beauty, and we're rationalizing that as a good thing.
But the irony is we've been doing that forever. Like, we're not really doing anything new. We're just calling it progressive. Whereas
I don't agree that we've been doing it forever. I think that's part of what
monetizing female beauty.
Well, but what I'm certainly saying is that female beauty is a commodity, and it always has been. If you were a beautiful woman 100 years ago, it was better to be beautiful than not beautiful. You weren't able to monetize it in the same ways. Like, there's prostitution
for yourself, right?
Right.
But it definitely.
But what I'm saying, it had worth, of course. But it in the culture we had, we did our best, and we didn't do this consciously. We removed the logic of the commodity and the marketplace from love. Like, yeah, the high school cheerleader or captain of the cheer squad was going to date the football captain. That was always going to happen. Thus it always was. Thus it always will be. But they got married young, and they had a family young. Mm. And the captain of the football team, he didn't spend his 20s and his early 30s, dating all of the cheerleaders and never settling down. You only have to go back a few decades where if you were single as a man,
the story progressed.
Yeah. But it was also like there was a moral judgment coming from society that said to be a man and single in his 30s, like there was something wrong about you. This was really something that like you wouldn't be hired, or you would be.
No, it would reflect poorly on your social status, on your
you weren't committed, you weren't serious, you were wayward, and all of these things were negative. And now that not only are they not negative, but in a way they're positive. And we're seeing what people do when they can commodify their better qualities, and they don't channel them into love and romance and family. And for those people, it can be great. It's great to make $100,000 a year when you're 20 as an influencer or as an OnlyFans model, I guess. I can see why that would be attractive. But your behavior still affects on everyone else. And there's a growing sector of male and female society that is unhappy and lonely and finding it almost impossible to navigate the romantic world positively.
What do you think dating should be like?
I think by the time people are 30, like, you should be married. I don't think people should date into their 30s. I think that's a recipe for real unhappiness.
Well, what's difficult for me hearing you say that, I think, is because I agree with you ultimately. And, was single at 29 and terrified to be single at 29 for so many reasons, because I'm very aware of how much I want a family. And a home and I want to build a future with a partner. For me personally, I think this is a struggle that I think a lot of women have. While that is going to be, and I want it to be, a huge part of my identity as a mother and a partner, it is not how I want to express who I am necessarily in full. Right?
As a mother,
as a person, like.
But I don't. Yeah.
No. But I'm like, I think what's difficult about that is so much of I feel the time I took in my 20s was also to figure out, who I was and what I needed and wanted. And I think it's actually the first time I think in history that there's like a weird time shift where women are being allotted that, and yet it's also working against us at the same time. The very kind of like freedom to really think through and uncover your sense of self outside of a domestic sphere is also hurting your chances of actually having that domestic sphere in so many ways.
I don't disagree. There's a tension at play, obviously. I think every choice you make entails some sort of sacrifice of other options you could have taken. I'm rankled a little bit every time this comes up because men don't have that similar list of options. There isn't like I had to even pursue a family as a man entails getting your career in order in a way it doesn't for a woman. In fact, like a big problem, God, more political incorrectness, but a big problem in any given society is people who have children who aren't ready to have children. But for most men, that's not
the case.
Better way to phrase what I'm saying is that family success for men is predicated to a huge degree on career success. And it's not the same for women. In fact, it's actually backwards, which is to say that as women attain higher professional success and as they go up, as they achieve more education, graduate and PhD, their fertility rates fall off a cliff for the obvious reason that they're exchanging their periods of peak fertility for career success or for educational attainment. But for men to actually even have a family, to make yourself viable in a woman's eyes, in the eyes of a woman who wants to have a family, you need that career. And that's one of the reasons that I'm, let's say, peeved at the dishonesty of equality, 50% representation, when in reality, what that means is those men who don't end up in careers, what you're de facto saying to them is you're not viable as a partner, to become a father, to become a husband. So figure out a meaningful life that doesn't involve family, because that's not for you. And we cannot talk about this. We're not at any point in our culture where we can, and it amuses me that we're theoretically basing all of our cultural decisions on reason at the moment rather than superstition or tradition. But there's so many things we can't talk about. And this is one of them. That as men's incomes go down in any given area, marriage rates go down for those men. Low income. And I find it so. I've read so many studies where the sociologists studying this affects surprise. I don't understand why for low income women, their income doesn't affect their marriage rates, but for low income men, it seems to. It's like, yeah, because you're operating on beliefs that are just completely erroneous to what we understand about human biology or about mammalian biology in general. Like, men have to bring something to the table to make themselves worthy mates, whereas the women are by default worthy mates.
Right. But what I also think I'm trying to express is, and this is, I understand like this is outside of actually the conversation that we're having in relation to Lost Boys, but I think it's more existentially related to how women can carve out a sense of self and identity beyond physical appearance.
Yeah.
I appreciate that a pretty girl doesn't need to do anything to get married. I also appreciate that many girls are aware of that fact. And I don't think we've been conditioned. I think biology plays a huge role none of us are really willing to look at either. And that's a conversation we should be able to have, but hopefully you and I can throughout the course of this podcast. But it's very difficult to express female identity outside of roles associated with your gender. And it's very easy, I think, to find ways in which men have, and historically, defined who they are and what they're able to contribute outside of the roles of father and husband and provider. I'm not saying that women, should absolutely all, be throwing caution to the wind and treat time as though it's infinite, because it isn't. But I do think there may be more conscientious approach to partnering is also keeping in mind, I don't know, what women might need. I don't know what that is yet.
But that's part of what I'm like. You can say that, but it doesn't even seem like women know. But to be fair, I don't think anyone really knows, right? Like, it's not. I don't know that women are being as aggressive in their pursuit of. I think it's a terrible thing to say. I think they're blindly following a path that's being prescribed for them, almost as blindly as they were following it pre-1960. It's just that this path is glitzed up with career and education, and the other one was family and marriage.
I mean, glitzed up, you kind of said that a little casually. Like, career and education is...
Well, family is a wonderful thing too.
Right. No, but I'm not saying, like, when we say glitzed up, that kind of minimizes...
It's part of... This is what... I don't think careers are inherently fulfilling. And I think most people don't draw much meaning from... And most people don't, by the way, have careers. They have jobs.
Right.
Like, most people don't do creative work. Most people don't do fulfilling work. Most people aren't in the job they wish they were in.
Right. But I think what I'm trying to express, and maybe poorly at that, is that it can no longer, this is what the 1960 did. It was no longer all or nothing, but it became all or nothing in a backwards way, right? Like, it was like we threw out the baby with the bathwater and stopped having babies, really. And now we're trying to find out what that middle ground might be, and we don't really know what it could be. But all I'm trying to say is, I think this is the first time in history in our culture where women are allowed to actually identify outside of the domestic sphere. And it isn't clear how they want to do that yet. But I do think that there is a genuine desire to do that to some degree. I'm not saying it's all women, and I'm not saying that it's...
I think that's the healthy motivation behind what's happening.
Right. But I'm just saying it's hard to mitigate that healthy motivation with the other biological motivations that are having a family. And
but it wouldn't... I don't see why it should be so hard, as long as we could actually just name them and speak about them. It's the fact that we haven't, we are explicitly saying there's one path to success for everyone, and women need to pursue that. That there isn't any kind of innate biological difference that would make those paths diverge at some point or make their interests diverge. We're not acknowledging that. We don't even talk about fertility, which is like, that should be the most uncontroversial thing to talk about.
Yeah, we don't even know about it. We don't even understand it.
Right. But that's my only point. Like, I don't think in principle it would be so difficult to have it both ways, to give women who wanted that option, the option, while also saying, hey, these are some of the realities that are going to be obstacles to you if you want both, or if you want a family, period. It's terrible, but it's repellent to men in their 30s who are single, who are maybe not, like, they don't have that kind of pressing clock. So they look around at single women in their 30s and they know very quickly they're being evaluated for that role. And that's a lot of pressure to put on someone, A, that you've just met, and B, that is used to kind of casual, that they've never been told they need to be prepared for more. So it puts these women at a massive disadvantage. And by the way, it also just adds to there's a kind of perverse amount of attraction given to young women. And the more single men you have in your 30s, the more attraction goes to those young women. And it's like, great if you're monetizing your body and your beauty.
Not so great for the rest of us.
It's certainly not great for single women in their 30s, because
who are actually serious about family planning, if they want that.
Yeah.
I know. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we find dating dysfunctional in 2020. Tune in next week.
I mean, but the easiest argument that it is dysfunctional is that there isn't a common goal to dating. So that you cannot describe something as dysfunctional unless it's supposed to have a function. And the function used to be marriage and children for as many people as possible. And now it's not that.